The famous question always is, what is the scariest movie ever? And to me, it's very subjective. It's always your opinion, not just horror movies, movies in general. You have to watch the movie and have your own opinion about it. But the thing is, with this movie, whenever I talk to an older crowd and they've seen this movie is always brought up as the scariest movie ever made to a lot of people.
Here's Johnny.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolates.
Expecto Patronum!
You're gonna die.
Released in 2008, starring Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman, comes The Strangers. I have wanted to talk about this movie for quite a while. I actually had this one planned last year for my Halloween special, but I got COVID and I missed a whole few weeks. So now this year is here, and now we can talk about The Strangers. And I'm gonna go ahead and say this. I actually like the sequel. I think it's a fun, entertaining 80s throwback slasher, so that's just me. But this one, to me, is better. A lot better. This movie is a definition of a post-9/11 horror movie that completely depicts reality. And I think that alone is why this movie is defined to a lot the scariest movie ever made. Because it's simple, it's easy, it's an hour and 25, and it knows what it's doing because of how realistic it is. And watching it last night, truly, in the dark, got a little nerve-wracking. If I was home alone and I watched this movie would be absolutely terrifying. The famous quote is, "Bigger is not always better," and that is very true for this movie. Seriously, it's an hour and 25-minute movie. There is not a lot of actors in this movie. It's set all in this one house for like 94% of the movie, maybe the driveway and one little scene at a restaurant. This movie takes place in this house with these two couples who just came back from a completely disaster proposal, and I think this movie depicts love relationship really well by very small cues, coming home to this surprise and having been happy, but it turns it on its head and says, it didn't happen that way. But then you get all that, and then these three strangers just come into your home, and you're home alone, and there's no reason why. They ring the doorbell, ask if someone's home, and just walk away. And then when the night gets darker and darker and the night goes on, it almost turns to a big bloodbath. There is blood in this movie, but this movie, like I said, it's not a big bloodbath movie. There's some really good, genuine jump scares that are very nicely done. And obviously, I think the most famous shot in this movie is when Liv Tyler is in her living room and the stranger is right behind her in the dark shadows, and it's silent. It's pure silent. I think that alone is one of the creepiest shots ever. Definitely one of the most underrated because it gets talked about when this movie gets brought up, but in general conversations of like scariest shots and moments in horror movies, I never hear this one. That moment is absolutely terrifying. And the thing is, with this movie, it's only these two people who, they give you enough character development with this whole situation of the proposal, even though I truly think the whole flashback in the very beginning of showing the proposal go wrong, I don't think it's necessary. I think a lot of them coming home, being sad, seeing the roses and being separated, that alone tells a better story, and it's really creative. Them just showing the scene, to me, feels a little like, you didn't need that. But again, once the doorbell rings, once they are at the door, that moment onward, there's just an eeriness to this movie, and just the low quality of sound design, the crickets, the wood cracking, and just silence in this movie, and seeing visual terror in this movie by these strangers in the windows, in the house. it's really well done. I'm not gonna spoil a whole lot about the ending of this movie because I don't think a whole lot of you have seen the movie. I know a lot of you mostly have probably heard of it, but a lot of people haven't seen the movie. So the ending I'm not gonna really spoil, but I will say I do like the ending. I think it's very ballsy for the story, even though it's based on true events. I don't know how true that is, but for how this movie ends, it's very dark. What happens, especially to his friend that comes over, that entire situation feels so realistic to happen in that moment. Again, no spoilers, but that just like, you're like, oh, can't believe that just happened. Because you didn't expect that. You thought it was going to be some slasher but that moment is that. Again, no spoilers. But if I had to say anything bad about this movie, the only issue, for an hour and 25, not a whole lot happens. And now what you're saying, you said simple is simple. This movie's better, greater is not always better. Very true. But I'm just saying, it takes, you can feel the runtime. You're like, it's an hour and 25-minute movie, but you can feel the time length in this movie. And not a lot happens, because it's all set in this one house. But again, it doesn't mean it's not a bad movie. I think this movie is criminally underrated in conversations of one of the best realistic horror movies. And in all honesty, I think this is a creepy movie to for sure watch in the Halloween season. I'm going to give The Strangers an A-. And if you're someone out there that does not like this movie, you think it's boring, slow, pointless, and it's kind of forgettable, I get it. But to me, I think the cinematography, the directing, the acting, the performances, I think it all really works for this atmosphere and what the story's trying to tell and just create. I think it works really well, and again, I really like this movie. But I'm just saying, I enjoyed that second one. I do. It's not as good as this one, but I'm very intrigued on this reboot trilogy that's happening. Very, very intrigued to see what they will do next. Anyway, guys, enjoyed this Halloween review, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye, everyone.